Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Matt Sprague. I'm Senior Product Marketing Manager for Trimble, and I'm joined today by Chris Bell, Vice President of Marketing at Trimble PPM. Today's webinar is the top 5 questions answered about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So over the past 5 or 6 months, myself and Chris both have been knee deep and elbow deep in everything that there is infrastructure, reading up on all the legislation, talking to dozens and dozens of owner organizations and chief engineers, executive directors, capital improvement program directors to hear about what their perspective was on this impending infrastructure, this impending bipartisan infrastructure funding. And today, the purpose of the webinar really is to share what we learned in the course of our research, but also from, and more importantly, the conversations that we've had with your peers. So today's run of the webinar is essentially we're gonna explore five questions that we posed to these owners that we talked to, and really kind of just play back their answers and how they were able to answer those questions. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading these questions, but we'll kind of go through them one by one. So first off, I'm actually going to pose the first question over to Chris. So the question basically came down to is, are you expecting an increase in funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
Matt, and first of all, thank you for having me. It's not so much a matter of if, it really is at this point a feeling of when that will all take place. So what we know today is that there is in total $550 billion of incremental infrastructure spending that's planned. That's a part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And what we're looking at is that there are several key categories where there is a sharp increase in funding. Areas like mass transit, which is expected to receive $105 billion. Roads and bridges expected to receive $110 billion. Energy or power will increase by $73 billion. Water and wastewater at $55 billion. And aviation and ports expected at $42 billion. It's a significant increase, and according to the most recent fact sheet from the White House, this is one of the largest federal investments ever made, and it includes the largest investment in passenger rail since the foundation of Amtrak. So it's not a small thing. Some people even talk about this level of investment being once in a lifetime. This type of investment will dramatically increase the project load that public authorities will have to deal with if they're delivering infrastructure projects. You know, the interesting thing that I think about when you think about the process of this fund is how much will go to the agencies for distribution and how will the money flow? Some of those aren't defined, but we would expect that a lot of the larger agencies, the state authorities, are going to receive the first rounds of funding, and then there will be distribution that's made. And what will be really important to know is that the selection and prioritization of the projects will be the largest definition of what projects get funded.
Cool. And Chris, do we have a guess on when the money will start to flow? Or is it still pretty much a guessing game?
It's still a guessing game, Matt. What we'll find is that it really has everything to do with the bill passing in its final form. Right now, current pundits would expect that this passing of the bill is relatively imminent. So we would expect votes to be happening sometime in the August-September timeframe. It will take some organization to start happening. And then as those processes get defined in the fourth quarter of 2021, we would expect some of these agencies to begin releasing dollars as late or as early as the end of this year and into the beginning of next year.
Gotcha. I think one other piece that was interesting. It might be very obvious, but it's worth noting is that there aren't going to be new distribution mechanisms. So it's essentially the same way that previous funding had been distributed. All of the agencies that we talk to are essentially looking towards their common funding mechanisms and grants and agencies that they would look to for funding in order to kind of see what the new requirements will be, what their grant applications will require, those type of things. But it's not going to be all of a sudden this brand new bipartisan infrastructure funding grant application agency that gets created. So it's all basically the same as it always has been. So they're not reinventing the wheel in terms of the distribution.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. And the FAST Act and the reauthorization is a good precedence for the flow of money and the process that's there. You know, Matt, when I think about all the conversations that you've had, that I've had with public agencies, there are many organizations that are in different levels of preparedness. Could you just speak to, what you've learned while talking to these agencies?
Yeah, I mean, so there are organizations that have kind of like a backlog of different projects at varying states of preparedness. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is aimed to fund projects that can make immediate impacts, right? So this isn't anything new. So the impacts and these impacts are fairly common in terms of funding legislature. So it's job creation, sustainability, socioeconomic impact. So owners are trying to make educated decisions to invest time and resources to make the more compliant projects shovel ready, so that if awarded, they can hit the ground running. So it's important to understand. So when I was talking to these owner organizations, they're doing a lot of work right now to get as many of the projects into that shovel ready state, because they really don't know which ones are going to be the ones that they need to prioritize for the funding, because they don't know what the requirements are yet. So they're kind of on a mad dash to do a lot of the early planning design work to get it ready.
Yeah, Matt, what I would add to some of the things that we learned, there were really three areas of impact that the administration is really looking for out of these capital projects. We're looking at the ability for these projects to create jobs, for it to promote sustainability and environmental protection, and we're also looking at socioeconomic impact. And that's one of the biggest takeaways. When agencies are looking at their projects and they're seeking to prioritize the projects that should receive funding as a part of this bipartisan infrastructure bill, you need to find a way to quantify job creation, sustainability, and socioeconomic impact. And if you have a project that could really hit on all three of those are the projects that are going to get prioritized and are more likely to get funded.
So one other thing to add to this topic, or to this question that I heard, which I thought was, again, maybe really obvious, but I thought was really smart, is because the flow of money, right? So the money will come from a federal source, it'll come down to a state, local, or regional source, and each one of those subsequent sources, that whenever you follow that money, may add additional requirements or criteria to the projects that will get approved for the funding. So a bunch of the owner organizations that we were speaking with were actually planning to set up meetings with the agencies that they normally get their funding with, to start to get an idea of which ones, what type of requirements were going to be added for those projects. So again, in turn, they can then invest their time and resources in making modifications to or prioritizing different projects that will eventually meet the criteria.
Matt, that's a really important takeaway, is that what you learned in that process is that proactive agencies and authorities are coordinating with parent agencies or other agencies where funding is expected, and they're trying to understand the additional requirements that may come with the funding. So they're actually setting up meetings right now to get prepared.
All right, we're moving along quickly through these questions, Chris. As I promised the audience, these would be quick hits. So here's the next one that we talked to the owner organizations about, is how will you manage the increased workload? So all of a sudden you get this new funding for either a large mega project or multiple larger projects. Either way, it's something that is more than what you're used to. So exactly how will they manage that workload?
Yeah, this really gets to a fundamental expectation of this increased funding. The Biden administration is looking for every agency to maximize the amount of infrastructure put in place for the dollar of funding given, right? So that's just a way to think about how do you get leverage out of every dollar that's invested. And one of the key areas in which to do that is to be very productive and very efficient and drive out all the waste in the process of creating infrastructure. So that has a lot to do with the setup of digital transformation. If you're an organization that's currently taking a manual approach to managing projects and capital projects, that becomes an inefficient use of the funding that's coming in. So the expectation is that we, as a country, as agencies, will do better, and that we'll be efficient with the funds that are received.
So it's interesting that even within some of the legislation that's being put out there, there is basically alluding to the need for the use of technology. So recent legislation has begun to require the use of what they're calling advanced digital construction management systems in order to receive the funding. And some have gone as far as actually including funding to procure such systems. Now, I'm gonna park the advanced digital construction management system for a second. Our next question actually dives into that a little bit more, like what exactly does that mean? But it's the idea that they are putting forth the use of technology as a mandate for a lot of this increased funding. So another example is the Federal Highway Administration has begun to up the game by requiring that a digital as-built be required as a deliverable throughout the construction process to enhance the future usability of the asset for operations and maintenance. So this is specifically referencing EDC 6 from the Federal Highway Administration. And funding, again, is being made available to achieve this. So they're asking everybody to do more, to evolve, to become smarter in terms of the use of technology, but they're also putting money where their mouth is. I think the main point here is that the old ways of doing things are no longer going to be good enough, and agencies are being required to evolve and use new ways to create efficiencies throughout the entire project lifecycle.
Matt, this is probably one of my favorite parts of the proposed language in the bill. Advanced digital construction management systems as a category creates the concept of an allowable expense where public authorities and agencies can submit the cost of their digital transformation as a part of their infrastructure work. So this means that much of their investment in technology and improving their processes to get that leverage for infrastructure dollars put in place, or infrastructure put in place for the dollar that they spend, is all funded through this new authorization. So Matt, you got to just break this down for us. Can you just help us to really define what advanced digital construction management means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before I kind of go into like the actual definition provided in some of the legislation, I want to bring it up one more level. And essentially, what this is talking about is a modernizing digital transformation. So when digital transformation is talked about, there are many agencies that have adopted technology, but the problem is they've adopted technology that addresses specific parts of the project lifecycle, and they're siloed data. And when data is siloed, really you can't harness the benefit of it altogether. So what the advanced digital construction management system, for the definition here, is a commercially proven digital technologies and processes for the management of construction and engineering activities, including systems for infrastructure, planning, coordination, construction, maintenance, modernization, and management. So if you listen to that, it correlates nicely to the integrated procurement model of DBOM, design, build, operate, and maintain. And I'd actually add one more piece to that, which is replace or renovate. So DBOM-R, if you will, so that we essentially have a true full life cycle of replacement of an asset. It'll eventually happen. So owners are interested in hearing, when this gets brought up, the owners are interested in hearing about a solution that helps them navigate a project life cycle. And the federal and government, by including such language in legislation, is encouraging them to do so. But also, I think the important part is to make sure that it's not siloed data, and they're able to harness and collaborate between the project life cycles for the benefits that it provides.
Yeah, Matt, the design, build, operate, maintain project delivery phases is a really important concept for thinking about these pillars of technology that can help along the way. What Advanced Digital Construction Management Systems clause really does is says any agency can make investments in those key areas to help create that digital transformation in their organizations. What I'm really excited about from the Trimble organization is that we have solutions in each of those categories. So when you think about design, design is really about making sure that all stakeholders have the ability to collaborate in the design phase around a building information model for infrastructure. So 3D designs are in a place where the engineering firms, the construction organizations, and the owner can all collaborate together. And during the build phase is that you have all the technology you need to be hyper efficient in managing the cost, the schedule, the resources, and all the activities and progress that's being made during the build phase. And all of that information is then stored during operations and maintenance, so that, Matt, if I remember right, the statistic is really that 80% or more of the total life cycle cost of a physically built asset is actually expended during the operations and maintenance phase of the life cycle. So it's really important that you do have the digital as-built. You have this information in your GIS, and you have very efficient ways to manage work orders that go into the maintenance cycle. We have a solution there as well called CityWorks. So Trimble has these anchor platform components that create a foundation for digital transformation in applications like Quadri, like eBuilder Enterprise, and CityWorks.
So Chris, when we talk about this, and you just mentioned Quadri, eBuilder, CityWorks, but really we're talking about the categories of design, collaboration, building or construction management, operation, maintenance. People say the three-legged stool, but I've heard you several times saying that actually they're missing the fourth leg, which is really something that kind of wraps it all together. Would you mind exploring that a little bit?
Yeah, we had a great conversation with a progressive leader from a very large transit organization. And he had a moment and sat us down and said, when we think about digital transformation within our organization, it is so important to be thinking about the design, build, operate, and maintain capabilities as a unit. But it's equally important to match that with our internal accounting or ERP system. So while we may talk about a three-legged stool, from that agency's perspective it's a four-legged stool. These four systems are the core foundation of digital transformation within that agency, of which all other productivity tools get attached to. So their approach, and we've heard this across many other public agencies, is that getting looking at your technology stack within your agency as your design collaboration system, your project or construction management system, your operations and maintenance system connected with your accounting system is that foundation. And that's the most important places to begin your journey.
Excellent. So last question. And so I'm gonna throw this one to you, Chris, is essentially, how is resiliency being accounted for in the planning and management of your projects and assets?
Yeah, so resiliency is really, really important. There's two categories. When you look at the bipartisan infrastructure deal, resiliency is defined as much as the ability to manage the threat that may come to infrastructure. That's one part of the equation. So security is a big part of resiliency, and that speaks specifically to the cyber threat that has hit our country. So one of the important components is that there is funding associated with resiliency to make sure that today's infrastructure organizations have a way to battle cybersecurity threats. So it's important as you choose technology providers that they have strong, hardened security capabilities within their technologies that they would deliver to you as an organization. The other part is the operations and maintenance and the resiliency of keeping our infrastructure up to date. And that has everything to do with making sure you have a clear picture of what the as-built conditions were. So being able to have a collaborative model that sustains for long periods of time as the asset changes over time, as-builts are going to be a critical part of resiliency.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an interesting report, smart market brief from Dodge Data and Analytics that had basically was asking, what is the benefits from utilizing a digital as-built, so models for collaboration during the construction. All right, so we're not even talking about the operations and maintenance, and that's where there is I'll kind of back up for a second. Oftentimes, some people correlate digital as-builts with digital twins, and they jump immediately digital twins to the operations and maintenance side, and not necessarily on how that was developed and how that can aid in the construction of the asset. So essentially, this survey was specific around the use of a digital as-built or the building of a digital as-built as being a benefit during the construction of or designing and construction. And essentially, the main there were about 8 benefits, but the top 4 were reducing rework, improved schedule performance, improved cost predictability, and improved labor productivity. All things that are going to drive down the cost of building that asset, which in turn correlates to being able to build more assets. So the whole point of the infrastructure funding was to help organizations do more. And now it's like, so instead of doing more because we got the funding for it, is can you really start to extend those dollars and do even more than you had previously done with the dollars that you're given?
Now that's great, Matt. When I think about the key takeaways from what we've learned in our exploration and meeting with a number of agencies across the country, be it a rail organization or an airport or a local water authority, these organizations are in a couple of phases. I think the first phase was the aggregation of knowledge. They were going through this process, Matt, of getting smart. I mean, would you agree? They were just consuming the information, watching the news, and learning more. And then what we're starting to see, and what I would encourage all of you that are watching this, is that go from getting smart and accumulating that information to get started. This bill is imminent, and something is going to be passed, and the exact characteristics we won't know until the final version passes. But proactive organizations, whether you are a small city, a county, a state, or a federal agency, all of those organizations are taking proactive steps to get started. And it has everything to do with establishing a strategy for digital transformation and being prepared to prioritize the projects so that they know exactly which shovel-ready projects are going forward. But Matt, I know you have a couple of additional takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, really, it overall revolves around, thank you for attending today. But as Chris just mentioned, the get started part. So if you're interested, well, rather, let me go back. It could be the get smart part or the get started, depending on where you are in your journey. We're here to help you, and we'd be honored to partner with you. So you can go to our website, so e-builder.net/infrastructure. So we've created specific content to keep you updated. All right, so we're committed to making sure that that information is relevant and timely of how everything continues to evolve. But you can also start to learn a little bit more around case studies and how other people have begun to solve these problems. And you should feel free to reach out to us. There. You can always click on the schedule a demo, or we have a little chat bot down there that can get you in contact with one of our consultants that can answer any and all questions for you. So once again, thank you all. Chris, thank you very much for jumping on this with me to share the information that we've learned. And again, thank you all. And we look forward to seeing and hearing from you soon. All right.
Okay.